going back with the flow, right, as we studied that the second portion was corolla. The third portion, which is a very important portion, is the stamen, right? And the stamen is a part of the androecium. If you remember the other day I said, what is the meaning of andro? Andro means male.
Yes, ma'am, I was about to say that.
Yes. And when we say gynoecium, gyno means female. This is the fourth word. Okay. So here we will have we can either call it the pistil, and many also call it the carpel, right? I don't know if all of you remember, we had studied that the stamen has, a top portion which is something like this, right? Which is known as the anther, right? And there is a thin structure, thin tube-like structure, which is known as the filament, right? So basically, the stamen can be divided into two parts, the anther and the pollen. And we have been talking so much about the pollen grains. So where are the pollen grains present? These yellow, mostly yellow pollen grains are present on the tip of the anther. So anther is covered by pollen grains. Right? There are pollen sacs which contains a lot of pollen grains at the top of it. Correct? So this is the structure of the stamen, which is known as the androecium, and it can be divided into anther and filament. Parts, it is the stigma. The knob-like portion is called the stigma. This slender structure is called the style, and this is the ovary. And within the ovary, there are these tiny structures which are called the ovules. Okay, so basically the gynoecium or the pistil can be divided into stigma, style and ovary, and inside the ovary there are ovules. Now when we talk about pollination, actually what happens is that from the anther all the pollen grains are transferred on the tip of the stigma. So this is called pollination. When the pollen grains are shifted from the anther to the stigma, maybe of the same flower, maybe of the different flower of the same tree or different tree but of the same species, this is called pollination. And pollination is always being done by a pollinator. This is what we've been discussing. The pollinator could be wind, air, insects, birds, human beings, right? So these are the four worlds of a flower, and this is the basic concept of pollination, right? One more thing, after the entire process of pollination and fertilization, everything is being done, what happens is that the ovary grows up in size, right? And then the ovary converts into the fruit. That, when pollen grains get shifted from the anther, from the androecium to the gynoecium, that is the stigma, right? That is called pollination. And this pollination is being done by a pollinator. A pollinator is the one who does the pollination, the shifting of the pollen grains, right? Now, can any one of you tell me, how does it stay in the stigma? Won't it fall off? Won't it just again fly away? Anjali, can you answer?
Which question, ma'am?
The one that I just asked, that once the pollinators bring the pollen grains on the stigma, how does it stay back in the stigma? Why doesn't it can again fly away? It can again be carried away by pollinators. Water can again carry it away. How does it stay back in the stigma?
Is it because it sticks onto the stigma and it's hard to get it off the stigma?
Yeah, so there must be something in the stigma. That's the reason why it is hard to get off the stigma. What is that?
Actually, because the stigma is having some sticky, so the pollen grains will stay there for a while.
Excellent.
Yes,
so basically what happens is that the knob-like structure, the stigma, has got certain sticky material in it. You know, even when you touch it, you can feel it, it's a little sticky. So what happens is that once the pollen grains fall on the stigma, it remains here for a few hours. It remains here for a few hours, few minutes, few hours, because it is very sticky. And there are certain flowers where, you know, the stigma has got certain very tiny hair-like projections. Just like we have, you know, you must be seeing carpets, rugs and carpets that you have at home. Something like that, very tiny hair-like projection. So what happens is that once the pollens fall here, it gets trapped by these hair-like projections. So it stays there for a while. It doesn't get carried away, it doesn't fly away, it doesn't get shifted again. So, right? So these are all acts of nature, you know, for protecting the pollination that has happened. It should sustain the pollination. Correct? So that is about it. Okay, so we are almost done with the 4 whorls of a flower. We did partly the pollination. Can you please read the first 3 points here? 1, 2, 3.
Calyx is the outermost whorl or set composed of green leaf-like protective structures in sepals.
Right, this is what we studied, right? So this is the outermost whorl, which is also a protective thing, leaf-like protection, when it is like in the form of a bud. Okay, which is the second point? Anjali, go ahead with the second point.
Corolla is the next inner whorl composed by brightly colored petals. Being brightly colored petals attracts insects for pollination.
Correct. So this is what we discussed when we opened the chapter with this. More the brighter, more the pollinators. Bigger and attractive the petals, more visible. Right? Okay. Third point, Anjali.
Stamens are next to corolla and consist of anthers and filaments. Anthers are swollen structures present on on the tip of
Filaments.
And the anther produce a powdery substance consisting of tiny structures called pollen grains.
Correct.
The stamens represent male part of a flower. Male sex cells are produced inside the pollen grains.
Correct. So this is what we have discussed. It has got 2 parts, the anther and the filament. The anther has got pollen sacs, which actually stores the pollen grains. And the last point, the 4th point, Anjali?
The central part of the flower is the female part, consisting of a flask-shaped organ called carpel. Each carpel consists of a basal, swollen part called the ovary. The ovary continues into a long style and ends into a knob-like part called stigma.
So the ovary contains many ovules. The female sex cell is present inside the ovule. And the ovules and ovary finally develop into the seeds and fruits respectively. So this is what we have been discussing. Correct? Thank you, Anjali. So that was about the 4 whorls of a flower. Correct? Now